Hey there. So I'm going to show you the difference between when you're working in rounds, joining your rounds versus continuous rounds, working in continuous rounds. So for this, I'm just going to go ahead and quickly, I have another tutorial on how I do my magic circles. I'm just going to go ahead and make one and make a magic circle with 6 single crochets in it real quick. So I just hold that in my left hand, cross it over, under, over, chain. I'm going to do 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so I have my 6 stitches there, and I'm going to pull my magic strand, but I'm not going to pull it super, super, super tight. I'm just going to pull it pretty tight, but not too tight because it can be really hard to start your next round. After the next round, I'll pull that so that there's no hole at all. It'll pull nicely closed. So, okay, so when it says to join, so if I'm going to join into my next round, I'm going to go with the first stitch, not that chain that we made. Remember, that's not a stitch. That does not count as a stitch. That's just to fake you out. But this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is our first stitch. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and insert our hook into that first stitch. It's pretty tight. And we're going to, pull up a loop. Sorry, yarn over, and we're going to pull it through, and we're going to make a slip stitch. So we just pulled through like that, and then we're going to chain one. Okay, now you can pull it nice and tight. Nice and tight. Okay. Okay, and then depending on your pattern, you would, it'll tell you what to do, but usually for my patterns, you'll stitch into the exact same stitch that you were using before, and you would move on. So like this. And for this, I don't use a stitch marker because, as you can see, there's a height difference here. So by the time you get around to this other side, you'll see where you started your first stitch. So you can still use a stitch marker, but I tend to not need one at that point, unless I'm working in rounds. So if you're not joining, if it says to work in continuous rounds, then let's go back to where our magic circle was before we joined. Okay, so we're back where we started. And now, if we're going to work in continuous rounds, you're going to want a stitch marker because you need to keep track of where your first stitch was. So you can keep track of your stitches, your stitch counts, things like that. So I like to just use a different colored piece of yarn. I just pick a little piece of yarn, and you just, before you make your first stitch, you just stick it right in there. Okay? And instead of joining by making a slip stitch and chaining one, you're just going to go, so say your first stitch is supposed to be a single crochet, you just go into that same stitch that you would join with, but just make your single crochet. So under, pull through, that's a single crochet. So by the time I work around and I go, oh, I'm at this stitch marker, I know that that was my very first stitch. So by the stitch before it, my very last stitch, I should have the same number of stitches that are indicated in the pattern by the end of the round. If I don't, I did something wrong. So that's a continuous round. That's it.